I'm going to start a project right now. This is my antique plane, numbered 131. I really like the way it's configured because it's got this extra part up here, unlike my other Coffin planes where you can grip it a little bit more with your hand when you push it. So this one has some defects in it. It's got a big crack in the bottom, and even if it was in great shape, I wouldn't dare use it because it's part of my collection and I don't use my older planes unless they're junk and I recondition them. But this one is it's only the only one I have shaped like this, and I'm not gonna touch it and try and use it. So what I'm gonna do instead is make copies. I have 2 blocks ready to go. These have been hand cut out of maple logs. I did all the milling by hand with hand saws that I made. I roughed it out of the larger slab with a skill saw. I did use a worm drive, but a lot of this involves handwork. I'm going to use all hand tools to get all my edges square and get it ready for layout. So I'm going to use a scrub plane, smoothing planes, and my my customized joiner plane for all this hand milling. I have a set of mortise chisels that I'll be using for some of the stuff around the throat and the pockets for the wedge. I'm going to use a compound miter box for the cut for this big part of the ramp back here. I can't get this blade out. It's stuck in here because of the shrinkage. I have 2 pieces of tool steel that I use for winding sticks to make sure that all my faces are flat. I have a marking gauge that I'm going to use. I use a 4H pencil, which holds a very good edge and stays sharp. I have a down and dirty square. I have some handmade plane maker's floats. This one cuts on the side, this one cuts on the edge. You can see those teeth. These are all handmade onyx handles. I also have some I guess you could call them rasps. I use them for plane making, but this is 5 Sawzall blades riveted together, and I use it as a rasp. 2 blades riveted together and 1 blade. So whatever I have to do to reach in here to do all this shaping and stuff. I also have a bevel gauge which I'll use to take some of these angles off of here and everything. But I believe this is this is bedded at 45 degrees to the bottom of the sole. So what I'll do is rough these. I'll get these squared up. I'm going to square the ends with the big chop saw that I have, and then I'm going to start my layout. I will get some very light duty cardboard and take tracings of all this stuff so that I can transfer the shapes to my roughs. And I think I'm also going to do a tracing for this section on the top. I'm going to take the same template that I would make from the bottom, but I'm going to cut it so that it fits in the top, so I'll have the shape for the upper section as well. Instead of squaring up and trying to hold this shape, I'll just duplicate it and use it for the top. The other thing that I'm going to do with this plane is I'm going to, instead of using a blade with a chip breaker, I'm going to use 1 piece of 3/16 01 tool steel. I'm not going to use a chip breaker. I'm going to use a thicker piece of steel without a chip breaker. I think it's going to simplify things, and it should do just fine. It also lowers the cost because planes that have chip makers are a whole nother animal. I have to spend money on that, and that's not the direction I want to go. Also, without the chip breaker, you don't have to do this milling in the wedge, and you don't have to do this milling in the bottom of the the bed of the plane, which has to receive the bolt for the chip breaker. So you do away with all that extra work, and it should serve the same purpose. Before there were chip breakers, it was just a plain piece of steel in most of your planes. So I've done it already. I already made a plane that doesn't have a chip breaker. It works just fine. So I've done a couple of these already, but never one with this extra little shape. So I'll do all my roughing with my scrub planes or my other hand planes, do the layout, and come back and film some more stuff, and we'll just continue it along, and you'll be able to see how I do it. I'm not a professional plane maker. I do this just for fun, but I want to film it so that other people can see how it's done, so that you're not watching me, but you're seeing how I do it. I'll try and explain some of the things, give you reasons why I do certain things, and then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of fine-tuning the wedge, shaping the blade, heat treating the blade, tempering the blade, all that good stuff. And then at the end, I'll have two nice planes. One of them I may not keep, but we'll see how that works. But I like to, if I'm going to do all this work, I like to have backups. So I intend to make two at one time. I have a layout here on my first block. So let me just point out a few things that I have going on here. Let's see. This is the front of the plane right here. This is the back of the plane right here. This line is the ramp for the blade. This line right here is the total height. This is be the sole of the plane. This line right here is the total height of the plane. This line represents the thickness of the blade. In order for me to get at this height, in order for me to get the width I needed up here, I had to change the angle of the bed line of the blade to less than 45. This is like 43 and a half, 44, something like that. I didn't want this area up here to be too small if this bed line came back about another 1/8 of an inch or 3/16. So I forced it to become the width I wanted, and that changed the angle. So then we have 3/16 for the blade, and then I came off this angle 10 degrees, and this is the angle of the wedge. And then what I did was down here, this is the internal line for the throat of the plane, and I allowed from the tip of the blade, the start of this little area inside the throat is a 1/16 of an inch back. So there'll be a 1/16 of an inch clearance between the edge of the blade and the beginning of this escape area for the chip. And then I have this area I'm holding. This is the top of the plane along the lower section, and I have the width I want right here where the throat begins, and this is the angle that I took with the bevel gauge. This is also an angle that I took with the bevel gauge. So this is the shape of the inside of the escape area for the chip, the throat area right in here. So what I'm going to do is set up my radial, my compound miter box, and make this cut. I'm going to square the ends, but I'm going to leave them long because there's no reason to cut it right to my lines. Now, I want to leave a little extra meat back here. There's going to be a lot of chopping in here. I'm going to have to clamp these, so I'm going to leave them long, but I will use the chop saw to cut through this line all the way up to the bed line. So this is all going to be removed up here, and then there'll be a lot of handwork after that. I have some lines for my layout. Let me show you first what's going on with the plane so there's no confusion about my layout. These lines that represent the perimeter of the plane, that's the bottom. That's the full size of the plane at the bottom. At the top, it tapers, and let me see if I could show that to you. There's a small little bevel up here. So the footprint at the top of the plane, all along here, is smaller than at the bottom. I'm going to cut that away later. But these lines represent the largest footprint that the plane has. So it's easier for me to do that, to lay it out that way. So here's the very front of the plane. Then I have the flat spot at the front of the plane, which is up here. Then I have the beginning of the throat, which is right here, and that's the line. Let's see if we could illustrate that line. This line right here is the angle that it follows. Now I usually do that by eye. I can sight down with one eye, sight the line, and then hold the chisel at that line. I could make a jig. It's not really a critical angle. And then what I do is basically come all the way in until I intersect the bed. And then after I have those two lines converge, then I chop away the lower angle, which is the escapement for the chips down at the bottom. That's the part that I cut away at the end. So I did a tracing up here on a piece of paper. I call this a little scoop. It's a decorative thing, but it also functions to widen the throat. I did a tracing of that and then drew that in here. So I have the full width of the bed area. Let's see if we can zoom in on that. Alright, let's see what we got here. Okay, this is the full width. This is where the blade is going to sit, right up to here. And then this is the beginning of the buttress. So in this little space is the blade and the wedge. Then the top of the wedge is going to hit this buttress. It's going to angle back slightly. And then the scoop is only at the top. But the rest of this line, all the way through here, is going to go straight down along this line. So this distance right through here, from my thumb to the end of this stick, that's the buttress. That has to go all the way down and remain the full width. But then from here, it tapers back to this point, including all the way down. There's like a convergence of angles. They begin to make themselves self-evident as you run out of wood and all these angles converge. So it's not as hard as it looks, but it's a little challenging just to keep track of everything. So what I do is I come in this way, holding my angles, and I'll chop away just a small little mortise in here, not too deep, but I'll chop it away, and that's so that when I come in the other way, I don't blow any of this out with the chisel. So I'll come in here just a little bit, make a shallow, like 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch pocket through here. That'll relieve all this grain, and then I'll turn it around and come into the front, and I should be good to go with all that. There's a lot of chopping involved. You can be pretty aggressive right in the middle, but as you start to get near these lines and near the perimeter and maintaining all these critical areas, you got to go slow, and you got to stop and sharpen your chisels, because as you get into this, you're gonna want to have a sharp chisel to make everything go easier and to get your finish on the wood smoother, because you're not going to want to reach in here with sandpaper and dress any of this up. So the other thing that I want to make clear is that what I do, in order to create the buttress, what I do is I come in here off this line straight back, and then I take a saw, and with the plane laying on its side, I cut through here to create this line. I don't do that with the chisel. I do this with a saw, and I have to pass the saw through the sole of the plane down here. So the saw is actually going to come like this and cut that buttress down to here on the bottom, and then down to here at the top. I connect those 2 points. Same thing back here. There's going to be a small little shallow cut right here, and then what I do is I clear away this this remaining piece. Making some progress. I got a hole that goes all the way through. What I did was I added to the layout. See if I can reach around the camera. What I did right here was I came in from the throat, I came in an extra 1/4 of an inch. That represents this line up here, which is the outside perimeter of the buttress. That buttress has to remain, it's an extra 1/4 of an inch from the full width of the blade. That extra 1/4 of an inch has to go all the way down. It has to be parallel to this 2-inch tapered slot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect, I have the two blades riveted together. I folded the other 3 blades back. And what I'm going to do is just come through here, and I'm going to connect this point with this point in a straight line on both sides of the plane, and that'll give me the line for my buttress parallel to the edges of the plane itself. Now I'm going to cut along the ramp and make the first cut for the buttress. I'm going to come down to my line, which is the full width of the blade, and I also have another line in the back. So you got to multitask here because you can't go in too far. So what I did was I took a hacksaw and I took the blade off, and then I put the blade through the slot, through the throat of the plane, all the way through the back, and then I reassembled the hacksaw. And what I do is I hold it against the ramp. This cut has to be in the same line. This blade is probably a little too fine for this, but it's only a 1/4 inch cut. You don't want to be too aggressive with it. and then I'll finish that, and then this one here, you have to guide very carefully because you don't have the ramp. You're not following the ramp. Same thing, it's only 1/4 of an inch deep. And what I could do, while I have the plane right here in this position, now when I flip the plane over, I have to take apart this hacksaw setup and turn everything around and do the other side. But while I have it right here and the camera is running, what I can do is start some of the other cuts, which is going to be like this. So this is where the blade and the wedge go, and you can do this work while it's on its side. You can stand it up and do it that way, but this is the idea of how to clean all this up. And you're going to come close to the lines with the chisel. And then clean everything up with your homemade tools, your rasps, your saw blades. Or in this case, I can use the plane maker's floats this way. And also I could do this one, which cuts to the side, and clean it up this way. So that's how I'm going to proceed from here. Once I have the tapered cut for the wedge and the blade on both sides, then I'll be able to true up the buttresses and get those angles, and then start to finish up the throat and the transitions from the buttress back into the throat through here. Let's take a look. This is my blade material, so it's pretty obvious. This material has to fit in the slot, and it has to be able to move freely through here. So that's how I check it. That's how I know I have enough room for the blade and the wedge. Okay, so now what I have here is I'm going to start working on the buttress. They're extra narrow. So what I'm going to do is I drew a line that comes 1/4 inch in from the edge of each side of the blade. And that's in pencil. And that line represents where the buttress has to be trimmed to. Right along here and right along in here. So what I'm going to do is shave all this back to these lines, which is, they're very close right now, but the lines will also help me make sure that the buttress, because the buttress is on a 10-degree taper, I have to shave it and still keep the line. So I'm going to use the layout on this piece of steel to do that. Once I get that trimmed away all the way down here, this is where it stops being 1/4 inch thick along here, and then it's going to taper from here up to this point, and back through here. This will all be, this is basically flat all through here after this line is defined. And then from here down, it's going to be tapered into the throat so that the wedge will be shaped to that same taper, and the chip will have as much room as possible to pass up into the throat of the plane without getting jammed up, without curling and making a mess. So I'm gonna keep clearing this out because I'm real close to this, and I'm gonna start shaping this and doing the taper down at the bottom, and then we'll come back and take another look.